The words hit me like a cold wave. I've decided to start a new life without you. They were not a secret whispered between us, but a public announcement shouted by my husband of 47 years, Richard. He said it at our daughter Jessica's wedding reception, with his champagne glass still raised. The room, filled with 200 of our family and friends, fell silent. The clinking of forks stopped. Everyone was watching, waiting for me to cry, to shout, to make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I simply smiled. What they didn't know was that I had been ready for this moment. The envelope I was about to place next to his plate was not a cry for help, but a quiet, powerful plan for revenge. My name is Annabelle Scott, and I was 73 years old. For most of my life, I had played the part of the perfect wife and mother. I had given up my own dreams to help Richard with his. He had 3 different careers, 2 business failures, and many midlife changes. I was always there, supporting him. I had raised our wonderful daughter, Jessica, who was sitting next to me, her wedding dress still clean, her face full of shock. But what Richard didn't know was that I had been planning my revenge for months. I had been getting ready for this moment. Everyone thought our life in Charleston, South Carolina, was perfect. We lived in a beautiful old house with big porches and old oak trees. It was the kind of house you see in magazines. We had raised Jessica there and hosted many parties. I had spent decades playing the part of the perfect Southern hostess. Richard and I had met in college almost 50 years ago. I was studying art history, and he was getting his business degree. I was writing my final paper about old art from the South, and I was excited about it. Richard came into my life with his big plans and a lot of confidence. He had big dreams of building a business empire. He was so sure of himself, and I believed in him completely. "You're going to help me change the world, Annie," he would say, using my special nickname. "We're going to build something amazing together." I believed him. When he asked me to marry him 6 months later, I said yes right away. I had my own dreams, too. I wanted to open a gallery and write books about art. I thought I could do both, support him and follow my own passions. But my dreams kept getting put on hold. First, it was hard for Richard to start his own company. I became his helper without pay. Then Jessica was born, and she filled my heart with joy, but she also took up all my free time. Then Richard decided to change careers again and become a real estate developer. Each time, I was the one who had to make sacrifices. I sold my small art collection to help pay for his new business. I put my dream of a gallery on hold to take care of our house while he traveled all the time. I smiled and played the role of a good hostess at countless dinners, charming his clients while my own interests slowly disappeared. "Annie, you're the rock that makes everything possible," he would tell me during the rare quiet times. I couldn't do any of this without you. I held on to those words, even when he was too busy to notice all I was doing. I told myself that a good marriage was about teamwork, that his success was our success. Jessica was the light of my life, a smart and strong girl who loved art like me and had Richard's drive to succeed. Watching her grow into a confident woman was my greatest joy. She went to college, got a good job, and found a wonderful man named David. Their wedding was everything I had hoped for. I had spent months planning every detail. What I didn't know was that Richard had also been planning something. For over a year, he had been getting ready to leave me. He had been moving money into secret accounts and making plans with a woman I thought was my friend. He chose to announce it at Jessica's wedding to cause the most shock and get the least trouble from me. The signs were there, but I was too trusting to see them. The late-night phone calls he said were for business. The weekend trips he called property scouting. He had become distant and moody. I thought it was because his new business was having problems. I didn't know his stress was from planning to leave me. The morning of the wedding, I felt so happy. My daughter was marrying a good man, and I was finally ready to think about my own life. At 73, I was healthy and had a lot of energy. Maybe it was time to start my art gallery or write my book. I even mentioned it to Richard at breakfast. Once things settled down after the wedding, I'd like to talk about some projects I've been thinking about, I said, buttering his toast just right. He barely looked up from his phone. Sure, Annie, we'll have time to talk about all kinds of things after today. I smiled, thinking he was ready to support me. I had no idea he was talking about the conversation he would have after he blew up our marriage. The wedding was beautiful. Jessica looked perfect in my grandmother's lace dress. Richard walked her down the aisle with a look of pride on his face. During the reception, I was in my element, making sure everyone was happy. I danced with Richard, feeling close to him again. You did an amazing job with this wedding, Annie, he said. Jessica looks perfect. Everything is perfect. She deserves a perfect day, I said, leaning into him. She does, he agreed. There was a finality in his voice that I didn't understand. I thought it meant he was happy. Then, the best man gave Richard the microphone for his toast. I expected him to talk about Jessica and David, to share some loving words about marriage. Instead, he gave me the worst public humiliation of my life. What he didn't know was that his betrayal would finally make me stop being the devoted wife and start being the strong woman I once was. The envelope I placed next to his plate had more than just divorce papers. It had proof of his secret money moves, proof of his affair, and a prenuptial agreement that we had signed 47 years ago. He had forgotten about it. He had wanted it to protect his future success. Now, it was going to protect me. Richard Scott was about to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of his life. The moments after Richard's announcement felt like a movie playing in slow motion. The 200 wedding guests sat in total silence, their faces frozen with shock. Jessica's face was white, and her mouth was open. David, her new husband, grabbed her hand. My sister, Margaret, looked at Richard with anger. But the most telling reaction was from Belle Whitman, a woman I had thought was my friend. She looked nervous, not shocked. She was playing with her jewelry and looking toward the exit. I knew right then that she was the other woman. She didn't look surprised because she already knew. The envelope I placed next to Richard's plate was made of expensive, cream-colored paper. I wanted everyone to see that this was a planned action, not a fast reaction to his cruelty. What's this? Richard asked, his confident look fading. Something for you to read later, I said, my voice calm. The years I had spent being a gracious hostess finally paid off. I stood up slowly and straightened my dress. I leaned down and kissed Jessica's cheek. I am so proud of you, sweetheart, I said softly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. This day is still about your happiness. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Then I spoke to the stunned crowd. Please, everyone, continue to enjoy the celebration. This is Jessica and David's day, and it should be a happy one. I picked up my small purse, held my head high, and walked out of the tent. I could hear whispers behind me. The late afternoon Charleston heat hit me, and I welcomed it. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Everything looked the same, but my world had completely changed. I heard the tent flap open and Richard's frantic voice behind me. Annabelle, what the hell is in that envelope? What have you done? I kept walking toward my car. For 47 years, I had always been there for him. That version of me was gone forever. He grabbed my arm. I stopped and turned to face him. The look on my face must have made him step back. The envelope has information that you should read carefully, I said calmly. I suggest you find a private place to read it, maybe after you finish celebrating with your guests. What information? What are you talking about? I almost felt sorry for him. He was so used to me being weak that he had forgotten I could think for myself. I'm talking about the preparations I've been making since I found out about your plans 3 months ago. I said, did you really think I wouldn't notice the money being moved to secret accounts? Did you not think I would wonder about those strange business trips and late-night calls? The color left his face as he realized his secret was not so secret. You've been spying on me, he said. I've been protecting myself. I corrected, something I should have started doing years ago. He grabbed my arm again, this time harder. You can't just walk away from me. Annabelle, we need to talk about this like adults. Adults. I asked, is that what you call announcing you're leaving your wife at your daughter's wedding? Is that what you call mature behavior? I thought it would be easier this way, with people around. I thought you would make a scene. And there it was, the truth. He chose the most public, humiliating place because he thought I would be too embarrassed to fight back. He thought I would play the perfect wife, even to my own ruin. You're right about one thing, I said. I won't make a scene. But that doesn't mean I won't defend myself. A car valet came with my car keys. I tipped him well and got into my car, a car I had bought with money from my family's trust fund, even though Richard had somehow convinced himself he had paid for our life. As I drove away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing alone, holding the envelope. For a moment, I felt a small bit of sympathy, but it was quickly gone, replaced by the memory of his cruel plan. The drive back to our house gave me time to think about what was next. The envelope had the divorce papers I had filed that morning, a report on his secret money moves, and copies of texts and emails that proved his affair with Belle. But the most important document was our prenuptial agreement from 1976. Back then, my family had more money than he did, and he had insisted on a prenup. He wanted to prove that he wasn't marrying me for money. I want to make my own fortune, Annie, he had said. The prenup seemed like a romantic gesture back then. It showed his belief in his own abilities. What Richard had forgotten was that the prenup had a morality clause. It said that if one of us cheated, the financial protections in the agreement would be gone. The innocent person would get to keep their own separate property and get money for the betrayal. In 1976, my separate property was just a trust fund and some family land. But over the years, while Richard was chasing get-rich-quick schemes, I had been quietly making smart investments with my own money. My money was worth a lot more than our joint money. The woman he was leaving wasn't financially dependent on him. She was much wealthier than he was, and she was now very motivated to protect her money. I drove through the city looking at the beautiful houses and streets where I had lived most of my life. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tonight, I would sleep in our bedroom for the last time as his wife. After tonight, I would start to rebuild my life as a woman who was finally free to chase her own dreams. The house looked the same when I arrived. The porch, the gardens, the windows, everything was just as it had been. But the reality had changed. The house was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. I parked and sat for a moment. In a few hours, Richard would come home and read the contents of the envelope. He would realize that his public humiliation had gone very wrong. He thought I would be helpless. He was about to find out I was prepared and in control. And for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. When I walked through the door, the house felt different. I went upstairs to our bedroom, the place where we had shared 47 years of life. How long had it been since we had talked about anything real in this room? I opened his closet and saw what I had missed that morning. Several of his expensive suits were gone, along with his favorite shoes and his travel bag. He had been slowly taking his things for months, so I wouldn't notice. I found empty spaces in his dresser where his watches and shirts used to be. He had been planning this for months while I was planning Jessica's wedding, completely unaware that our life was falling apart. This made his public announcement even more cruel. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was a planned campaign to get what he wanted while leaving me with nothing but shame. I sat in a chair, feeling every one of my 73 years. For months, I had been living with a man who was already gone, who had emotionally left me while still enjoying all the comforts I provided. My phone started to buzz with calls and texts. My sister, Margaret, left a voicemail full of fury and support. Jessica's voice was shaky and tearful. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I can't believe Dad did that to you." More calls came from friends, all offering support. But under their concern, I could hear their curiosity. By tomorrow, everyone in Charleston would be talking about us. The humiliation was heavy. I had spent my whole adult life building an image of a happy marriage. Now, I was the woman whose husband had left her at their daughter's wedding. I was the subject of pity and gossip. I turned off my phone and took a hot bath. As I soaked, I tried to understand how I had missed the signs. The distance between us, the way he stopped asking about my life, the way he treated me more like a housekeeper than a partner. I had told myself it was work stress or the normal part of a long marriage. I had been wrong about so many things. The bathroom door opened, and Richard walked in, holding the cream-colored envelope. His face was pale, and his usual confidence was gone. "Annabelle, we need to talk about this," he said. "I'm in the bath," I said, not inviting him in. He waved the papers. "What is this supposed to mean?" "Divorce papers, financial reports. What are you trying to prove?" "I'm not trying to prove anything, Richard. I'm protecting myself from the results of your lies." "Lies? Annabelle, people grow apart. Marriages end. That doesn't make me a criminal. Stealing money from our joint accounts makes you a criminal," I said calmly. "Moving money without your wife's knowledge makes you a thief. Planning to leave your wife with nothing while you start a new life with another woman makes you both a criminal and a moral coward." He sat down on a chair, the papers in his lap. "I never meant for it to happen this way," he said. For a moment, I heard the young man I had fallen in love with. "How did you mean for it to happen, Richard? What was your plan for destroying our marriage that would have been better?" I thought it would be easier if it was public. I thought you'd accept it gracefully if people were watching. You thought I'd be too worried about what people thought to defend myself. I thought you'd understand that we've been growing apart for years. We don't have anything in common anymore. I looked at him. "What do you want, Richard? What have I been stopping you from having?" "Freedom," he said right away. "The chance to live my life without having to think about someone else's needs first. And Belle offers you that?" I asked. His face turned red. "Leave Belle out of this." "I can't do that, since she has been in our marriage for over a year." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me on purpose and in public. You chose the cruelest way to end our marriage on our daughter's wedding day. I thought it would be a clean break, like pulling off a bandage quickly." "Whose idea was that, Richard? Yours or Belle's?" His silence was an answer. "The prenup," he said suddenly, his voice desperate. "Annabelle, that was 47 years ago. No court would make that stick. Actually, it's been reviewed by excellent lawyers, and it's perfectly valid, including the morality clause you insisted on." He looked confused. "The morality clause? Section 7. Either person cheating ends the financial protections and gives the innocent spouse their own property plus damages." The color left his face as he finally understood. "But that would leave me with almost nothing. It would leave you with exactly what you brought to this marriage." I said, "Your personal things, your business assets, and your debt. Annabelle, please, we can work this out. We don't have to get lawyers and courts involved. For a second, I felt the old urge to protect him, to make it easier for him. But that feeling quickly passed. I think we're past the point of reasonable discussion, I said, getting out of the tub. You made your choice when you decided to humiliate me publicly instead of having an honest talk privately. But the money, Annabelle, most of what we have I earned. Actually, that's not true, I said. Most of what we have came from my family's trust fund and my investments. Your businesses have mostly failed. My words were cruel but true. I was the one who had kept our lifestyle going. You can't just take everything, he said, following me into the bedroom. I'm not taking everything. I'm keeping what's mine. 47 years of marriage, and you're going to leave me with nothing? I turned to face him, feeling a wave of anger. 47 years of marriage, and you were planning to leave me with public shame and whatever little bit you decided I deserved. Did you think about my financial security when you were planning your new life with Belle? Did you think about what would happen to me? I thought you'd be fine. You're smart. You're capable. You'd figure it out. I am smart and capable. I agreed. Smart enough to have seen this coming and capable enough to have prepared for it. Richard sat heavily on the edge of our bed. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now you find somewhere else to sleep tonight, I said. Tomorrow we'll begin the legal process of ending our marriage. Annabelle, please, can't we try counseling? Can't we see if there's a way to save this? I looked at him for a long moment, trying to find some piece of the love I once felt. But all I saw was his selfishness and his cowardice. You should have thought about saving our marriage before you started planning to destroy it. I said, you should have considered counseling before you started sleeping with another woman. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. I'll stay at the club tonight, he said. That would be best. He grabbed some clothes and toiletries. As he walked out the door, he paused and looked back at me. I did love you, Annabelle. For a long time, I really did love you. I know, I replied, but that doesn't make what you've done any less cruel. After he left, I sat alone in the room, surrounded by the life we had shared. It felt as if he had died. The silence was deep. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding my life. Tonight, I would mourn the marriage I thought I had. But under the sadness, there was something else, a feeling I was just starting to know. Relief. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to think about Richard's needs. I was completely free to make my own choices. It was both scary and liberating. The old me was gone. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe it was a chance to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be the perfect wife. Maybe it was time to find out what Annabelle Scott could do when she finally put herself first. The next morning, I woke up in the center of our big bed, spread out for the first time in 47 years. The sun streamed through the window, making everything look sharp and clear. My phone showed 37 missed calls and twice as many text messages. Word of Richard's public act had spread. I looked through the messages. Most were offers of support. But one message made me sit up straight. It was from Grace Hamilton, a lawyer I knew a little bit. She was an expert in divorces. Annabelle, I was at the wedding yesterday and saw what happened. If you need a lawyer or just want to talk, please call me. What Richard did was unacceptable, and you shouldn't have to go through this alone. I read the word unacceptable over and over. Everyone else had just called it unfortunate. Grace was the first person to say his actions were morally wrong. I called her number. Grace Hamilton. Grace, this is Annabelle Scott. Thank you for reaching out. Annabelle, I'm so glad you called. I'm outraged on your behalf. What Richard did was not just cruel. It was a planned move to put you at a great disadvantage. Her words were a big surprise to me. I had been so focused on the emotional side of his betrayal that I hadn't seen the strategic part. He had counted on my embarrassment to keep me from fighting back. I hadn't thought of it that way. I admitted. Most people don't, which is exactly what manipulators count on. Can we meet today? I'd like to see the documents you mentioned. 2 hours later, I was in Grace's office. She looked at the prenuptial agreement with great focus. "This is excellent work," she said, looking up at me. "When did you have this reviewed?" 3 months ago, when I first found the money problems. "So, you've been planning your response for 3 months while Richard thought he was planning his escape. I suppose that's one way to put it." Grace looked at me with sharp eyes. "Annabelle, forgive me for being direct, but you don't seem like someone who just had a terrible surprise yesterday. You seem like someone who has been preparing for battle." She was right. The woman who had calmly placed that envelope was not the same woman who had woken up to a bad surprise 3 months ago. 3 months ago, I was a devoted wife who would have done anything to save her marriage, I said. But watching Richard plan his betrayal while lying to me every day changed something in me. What changed? I realized that the woman I had been for 47 years, he didn't want a partner. He wanted an audience. And when I was no longer a good enough audience, he found a replacement. Grace nodded. "That's a very mature way to understand what happened. Many women in your shoes spend years trying to figure out what they did wrong." "Oh, I did that too," I said, "for about 2 weeks. Then I started looking at our financial records, and I saw that this wasn't about me. This was about what Richard wanted to take from me while losing as little as possible himself. I told her everything I had found. The secret bank transfers, the credit cards used for his affair, the money he spent on things he never mentioned to me. He was building a completely separate financial life. Grace said, "That's not just an affair. That's a business plan." She explained that in South Carolina, a husband spending marital money on an affair was a crime. With the prenuptial agreement, his actions were a legal disaster for him. "But here's what I find most interesting," Grace continued. "Your separate money has grown a lot over the years." I nodded. "I've always been careful with investments." "How much?" she asked. "The last check was just over $3 million. Grace put down her pen and stared at me. "Annabelle, do you know that you are much wealthier than your husband?" "I always suspected it," I said, "but he managed most of our money, so I never really looked at it." "He managed the joint money while you built your own wealth. That's actually brilliant, whether you planned it or not. What does this mean for the divorce?" I asked. "It means you are not the poor woman Richard thought. He was leaving. It means you have options he never saw coming. And it means his public humiliation of you was not just cruel, but strategically stupid." Grace laid out a plan that was both full and powerful. We would file for divorce based on cheating and financial crimes. We would demand the prenuptial agreement be fully enforced, which would leave him with only his own property and business debts. We would demand he pay back the money he stole. But most importantly, Grace said, "We're going to make sure everyone understands that you are not a victim. You are a survivor who was smart enough to protect herself." In the days that followed, Grace's plan began to unfold. While Richard was likely waiting for me to accept whatever small settlement he offered, Grace was building a legal case that would show every one of his lies. The first step was a financial report that showed all of his secret spending. The second was an official demand for him to stop using any of our joint accounts. The third was a court order to keep him from selling any of our shared property. "You're trapping him," I said during one of our meetings. "I'm using the same organized approach to protect you that he used to rob you," Grace replied. "The difference is that what we're doing is legal and moral." Richard's phone calls to me started on the third day. At first, he tried to be nice, suggesting we could work things out without lawyers. When I told him lawyers were already involved, his voice changed to anger, then to threats, and finally to desperation. "Annabelle, you're destroying my life," he said during what would be our last direct talk. "Something I should have started doing years ago," I replied. "What about everything we built together? What about our history?" "Our history is exactly why this is so painful, Richard. If you could so easily betray someone you loved for 47 years, what does that say about you? I made mistakes. People make mistakes. You made choices. Planned, deliberate choices for over a year. You chose to steal from our marriage. You chose to lie to me every day. You chose to humiliate me publicly instead of talking to me privately. I never meant for it to happen this way." He couldn't answer the question of how he had planned for it to happen, just as he couldn't understand that his public act had led to my complete resolve to protect myself. The big change came when Belle called me directly. I almost didn't answer, but my curiosity won out. "Annabelle, this is Belle Whitman. I think we need to talk. I can't imagine what we have to discuss. We have Richard in common, and I think there are things you should know about his plans." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee. Belle looked nervous and not at all glamorous. "I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far," she began. "How far did you intend for them to go?" I thought Richard was already separated from you. He told me your marriage had been over for years, that you were just going through the motions for show." Her words hurt, but they also made something clear. Richard had not just been lying to me. He had been lying to everyone, making up stories to make himself look like the victim of a bad marriage, instead of the person who was destroying it. "What changed your mind about his story?" I asked. "The wedding announcement. When he told me he was going to announce your separation at Jessica's reception, I was horrified. I told him it was cruel, but he didn't listen. He said you would never agree to a divorce unless you were forced to face the truth in public." Belle looked truly ashamed. Now I realized that he was describing himself, not you. He was the one who couldn't have an honest talk. He was the one who was too cowardly to deal with the truth of what he was doing. She went on to tell me about his promises to her, his plans to buy a beach house, and his belief that the divorce would be quick and easy because I would be reasonable. He never mentioned the prenuptial agreement. I asked. "Never." He talked about the settlement, like it would be a simple split of assets. He said you would be happier with a smaller house anyway, that you were more interested in books and art than money. I almost laughed. He had been so focused on his own desires that he had never really seen me as a person with my own thoughts and power. "What are you going to do now?" I asked Belle. "I'm going to disappear from both of your lives and try to get my good name back. This whole situation has been a disaster for everyone involved." "Not for everyone," I corrected. "It's been a liberation for me." After Belle left, I sat alone in the coffee shop, watching life go on. For the first time since Richard's announcement, I felt a sense of excitement about the future. The woman who had defined herself by her husband's needs was gone. In her place was someone I was just starting to get to know, a financially independent, smart woman with decades of experience and wisdom. The idea was both scary and exciting. That evening, I called Jessica to check in. "Mom, I'm so sorry about Dad," she said right away. "How are you handling all of this?" "Honestly, I'm angry that he ruined my wedding day," she said, "and I'm angry that he treated you like you were unimportant after everything you've done for him. I don't want this to hurt your relationship with your father." "Mom, he hurt his relationship with me when he decided to publicly humiliate you. You didn't do anything wrong here." I could have handled things differently. How? By accepting his cruelty gracefully? By making his betrayal easier for him? No, Mom. You did exactly what you should have done. You protected yourself. After we hung up, I realized that Jessica's reaction was something I hadn't expected: respect. My daughter wasn't seeing me as a victim to be pitied, but as a woman who had faced a terrible situation with strength and intelligence. It was the first time in my adult life that I had been admired for putting my own needs first. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal papers, financial discoveries, and a complete change in my understanding of my marriage. Each day brought new details about Richard's lies and a new appreciation for the strength I hadn't known I had. Grace had put together a team of experts: a financial investigator, a private detective, and a public relations consultant. The message was clear. We weren't just defending against Richard's betrayal. We were building a case to use his own actions against him. The beauty of your situation, Grace explained, is that Richard has created a perfect trail of his bad actions. Every secret money transfer, every hidden meeting, every lie he told has left a record that we can use to show a pattern of planned deception. The financial expert, Patricia, had found money problems going back 3 years. Richard hadn't just been planning his exit. He had been slowly taking money from our shared life while pretending everything was fine. "Mrs. Scott," Patricia said, "your husband has been treating your joint money like his personal piggy bank." She showed me the transactions. The money was always taken in amounts just small enough to not send me a warning. Just over $400,000 taken from joint accounts over 3 years. And that's not even counting the money you lost because he lied about our finances. Grace leaned forward. "Annabelle, this level of financial wrongdoing goes beyond just marital betrayal. This is a criminal act. Are you suggesting I press criminal charges?" "I'm suggesting we tell Richard that criminal charges are a possibility if he doesn't fully cooperate with the divorce." The private detective, Robert, had found even more. He showed me how Richard had been living a double life for over 2 years. "Mrs. Scott," Robert said, "your husband has been very careless about covering his tracks. He used credit cards and made hotel reservations and sent text messages that create a full record of his relationship with Mrs. Whitman. He showed me photos, phone records, and credit card statements. The man I trusted completely had been lying to me about almost every part of his life outside our home. But here's what I find most interesting," Robert continued. "Mrs. Whitman wasn't his first affair. There's proof of at least 2 other relationships over the past 5 years. The room went silent as I took in this new information. I had thought I was dealing with a man who had fallen in love with another woman. Instead, I was dealing with a man who had been cheating for years while I was completely unaware. How many others?" I asked quietly. "At least 3 that I can prove, possibly more." I sat back, trying to connect this information with the man I had thought I was married to. "Mrs. Scott," Grace said gently, "I know this is a lot, but it makes your position much stronger. This isn't about one mistake. This is about a pattern of lies that goes to the heart of his character." In the following days, I found myself looking back at our whole marriage. How many business trips had been affairs? How many late nights at the office were spent with other women? How many times had I supported a man who was lying to me about everything? The more I learned, the less hurt I felt about losing him, and the more angry I became about the years I had wasted believing in a partnership that never really existed. But the anger was a good kind of energy. For the first time in decades, I had a clear goal: to protect myself and make sure Richard faced the consequences for what he had done. The public relations consultant, Victoria, was managing the social side of my situation. "Annabelle," she said, "Richard chose to make your private business public, so we need to control the story. Right now, there are 2 possible stories. Either you are the victim of a cruel abandonment, or you are the strong woman who refused to be taken advantage of. Which story is true?" "Both," I said. But the second one is more powerful for you and more of a problem for Richard. Victoria started to share information with key people in our social groups, making sure they understood not just what Richard had done, but how he had lied to everyone. The response has been amazing, she reported. I've never seen a community turn against someone so completely and so quickly. Richard has gone from being a successful businessman to being seen as a calculating criminal. The social results for Richard were fast and complete. His membership at the country club was quietly taken away. Business partners started to avoid him. Invitations to parties stopped coming. Meanwhile, my own social standing was changing in a way I didn't expect. Instead of being the pitted wife, I was seen as the smart woman who had outsmarted a man who had underestimated her. You've become a kind of folk hero, Victoria said with a smile. Women are talking about you as proof that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. The change was most clear at a charity lunch I went to. I was nervous about going, but when I walked into the room, I was met with real warmth and what felt like respect. Annabelle, a friend named Margaret, said, I just want you to know how much I admire the way you have handled this. What Richard did was unacceptable, and your response has been absolutely brilliant. Other women said similar things. They didn't feel pity for me, but respect for how I had protected myself with strength and intelligence. You've inspired my daughter, one woman said. She said, if a 73-year-old woman can start over and win, then I can certainly handle my own situation. The main speaker at the lunch, a successful businesswoman, even mentioned me as an example of someone who refused to accept other people's limits. The recognition was both nice and motivating. I had never thought of myself as someone who could inspire others. After the lunch, I had coffee with 3 women who wanted my advice about their own lives. One was dealing with a husband who was hiding money. Another was thinking about leaving a bad marriage. A third was trying to rebuild her life after her husband's affair. How did you find the courage to fight back? Asked one of them. I didn't feel courageous. I admitted. I felt angry and betrayed and determined not to let him destroy me. But how did you know what to do? I didn't know what to do at first, but I knew I needed help, and I was finally ready to ask for it. The conversation went on for 2 hours. By the end, I realized something important was happening. These women weren't just looking for advice. They were looking for permission to put their own needs first, to stop accepting bad behavior, to believe they deserved better. You know what's funny? One woman said, I've been thinking I was too old to start over. But if you can rebuild your life at 73, what's my excuse? As I drove home, I realized that my personal nightmare had turned into something bigger and more meaningful. My refusal to be thrown away had become a symbol of the possibility of starting over at any age. That strength could be found even in the worst situations. That evening, I called Grace to talk about the divorce. Richard's lawyer has been pushing for a meeting, she said. They're clearly hoping to avoid a trial where all of this evidence becomes public. What do you recommend? I recommend we agree to their offer, but only if they agree to our terms completely. You are in a position of strength, Annabelle. You don't have to compromise. What would our terms be? Full enforcement of the prenup, full repayment of the money he stole, and his acknowledgement of his financial crimes. And, of course, your separate money stays completely separate. And if he refuses, then we go to trial and make sure every detail of his lies becomes public record. I don't think he wants that. As I hung up, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 2 months. The woman who had been publicly humiliated was now someone whose strength and intelligence were being praised. More importantly, I had become someone I liked and respected. For the first time, I was making decisions based on my own judgment, not someone else's. The old Annabelle Scott was gone forever. In her place was a woman who was just beginning to discover what she could do when she finally put herself first. And that woman was worth fighting for. 3 months after the wedding disaster, I found myself in a place I never could have imagined. I was in full control of my own future and excited about what was to come. The legal case was going in our favor. My social standing had not only recovered, but was better than before. And I was discovering parts of myself that had been asleep for 47 years. The mediation meeting that Grace had set up took place in a neutral room. Richard arrived with his lawyer. He looked tired, and his usual confidence was gone. He finally understood the results of his actions. "Mrs. Scott," Richard's lawyer began, "my client is prepared to offer a fair settlement that would allow both of you to move on without the cost and publicity of a trial." Grace smiled. "We're certainly interested in hearing what Mr. Scott thinks is fair, since he has been stealing from the marital estate for years." "Now, that's a very harsh way to put it," the lawyer said. "It's an accurate way to put it," Grace replied, sliding a folder across the table. "Perhaps you'd like to review the financial report before we continue." I watched Richard's face as his lawyer read the proof of his financial crimes. His face turned white. He saw that it would be impossible to deny what he had done. "Richard," I said quietly, speaking directly to him for the first time since the wedding, "did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid or too trusting to notice what you were doing?" "Annabelle, I never thought you were stupid," he said, his voice a whisper. "Then you thought I was weak. You thought I would accept whatever little bit you decided to leave me and be grateful for it. I thought—" He paused, trying to find words to justify the unjustifiable. "I thought you'd be better off without me. I thought you'd be happier. You thought I'd be convenient. You thought you could steal from me, betray me, and humiliate me, and I would make it easy for you by not fighting back." The meeting went on for 6 hours. Richard's lawyer slowly accepted that his client had no power in this discussion. The proof of his financial crimes was too strong. The prenup was solid. The pattern of his lies made it clear this wasn't just a sad marital breakdown. By the end of the day, we had a settlement that gave me everything Grace and I had asked for. Full enforcement of the prenup, all the stolen money returned, and an acknowledgement of his financial wrongdoing. Richard would leave the marriage with his personal belongings, his failing business, and about $50,000 left in his accounts after paying his legal bills. "This leaves me with almost nothing," he said. "This leaves you with exactly what you brought to our marriage." I corrected. "Your personal property, your business assets, and your debt. But 47 years together should count for something." I looked at him and felt nothing but pity for how he had destroyed everything good between us. 47 years did count for something, Richard. They counted for enough that I supported your dreams and built a life around your happiness. But you decided that 47 years counted for nothing when you started stealing from me to pay for your affairs. As we left, Grace walked with me to my car. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I feel free," I said, and realized it was completely true. For the first time since I was 24, I didn't have to think about anyone else's needs. I could do whatever I wanted with my life. "Any ideas about what that might be?" Grace asked. I smiled, thinking of the plans that had been growing in my mind. "Actually, yes, I have some very specific ideas." The next morning, I called my old graduate school professor. I told her I was ready to start working again. "I want to finish the research I started 49 years ago. I want to write the book about Southern art that I never had time to complete." She was excited. She told me that the art history department at the College of Charleston was looking for a visiting scholar to work on a project. I was perfect for it. The salary wasn't much, but I didn't need the money. I needed the purpose. The interview was both scary and exciting. I hadn't done this kind of work in decades, but the skills were still there. The department chair, a smart woman named Dr. Martinez, immediately saw the value of my experience. "Mrs. Scott, your early research was ahead of its time," she said. "The questions you were asking are exactly what scholars are exploring now." "I've stayed current with the field," I said, "but I've never had the chance to contribute to it." "What stopped you?" "I chose to support my husband's career and raise my daughter instead of chasing my own dreams," I said honestly. It was the right choice for my family at the time, but it meant putting my own work on hold. And now I'm free to choose what I want to do with my life, and I want to spend it doing work that matters. I was offered the position right away. For the first time, I would be Dr. Annabelle Scott, a scholar and researcher, not just Mrs. Richard Scott. The change was instant and full of energy. Within weeks, I was completely absorbed in research that felt both familiar and new. I was working with people who valued my mind and my ideas. Dr. Scott, a graduate student named David Kim, said, "Your view on how these art forms have changed is exactly what I need to understand my own work." "Please call me Annabelle," I said, and we had a long, great conversation. "You should think about presenting your research at a conference next spring," he said. The thought of returning to academic conferences after almost 50 years was both terrifying and thrilling. The old Annabelle would have found an excuse to avoid it. The new Annabelle started preparing her presentation that same night. My personal life was also changing. The house that had been ours for decades now felt completely mine. I started redecorating, filling it with art and furniture that I loved. I turned Richard's old office into a library and a place to work. It had always been his space, filled with his business things. Now, it was my sanctuary. "Mom, this space is amazing," Jessica said during a visit. "It's so you. It looks like the office of a professor or a writer, the space of someone who has important work to do." She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I had a space that was entirely my own, designed for my needs and interests. "How are you feeling about everything that's happened?" Jessica asked. "I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was supposed to be," I said. "Does that sound strange?" "Not at all. Dad spent so many years deciding what our family should look like, what you were supposed to be. Now that he's gone, it's like we can all figure out who we really are." Our relationship had become deeper and better. We talked about books, careers, and ideas in a way we never had before. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said. "I'm proud that you didn't just accept his cruelty. I'm proud that you fought back and won." "I'm not sure I won anything," I replied. "I just refused to lose everything." That's the same thing, isn't it? Maybe it was. Maybe the simple act of refusing to be destroyed was a victory in itself. That evening, I got a phone call. That would be another turning point. It was from the director of the Charleston Museum. She had heard about my return to academic work. "Dr. Scott, I understand you're working on documenting regional art forms. We're looking for someone with your knowledge to help us develop a big art show." The project she described was exactly what I had dreamed of doing as a student, bringing forgotten artists to a wider audience. "We have funding for a 2-year research position," she said. "The art show would open in 18 months, and we'd want the curator to write the book that goes with it." "Are you offering me the position?" I asked. "I'm offering you the opportunity to shape what could be the most important art show in the Southeast in decades." I accepted right away. At 73, I was finally building the career I had dreamed of at 24. The decades I had spent supporting Richard hadn't been wasted. They had prepared me for this work, giving me wisdom and perspective that a younger person wouldn't have. I traveled through South Carolina, talking to artists and documenting their work. Dr. Scott. One artist said, "Nobody's ever asked me about the history of my techniques before." That's exactly why this project is important, I replied. Each conversation showed me something new about the art and also something new about myself. I was good at this. I had the skills to make people feel comfortable and to ask the right questions. You have a gift for this, another artist said. You listen in a way that makes people want to share their stories. I had forgotten that about myself. I had always been a good listener, but I had used that skill for Richard's business and Jessica's emotional needs. Now, I was using it for my own work. 3 months into the museum project, I got a call from the editor of a famous art journal. She had heard about my research and wanted me to write an article. I'd be honored, I said, but I haven't published academic work in decades. That's exactly why we want your view, she replied. You bring a unique combination of old knowledge and new insight. The article I wrote was a big success. It led to more offers to speak at conferences. The idea of returning to publishing after almost 50 years was both scary and exciting. The old me would have made excuses. The new me started preparing my next article that same evening. 1 year after Richard's terrible announcement, I stood in front of an audience of 300 women at a conference, ready to give the main speech that would turn me from a regional scholar into a national voice for women's empowerment. The conference organizer had heard my story and knew our attendees needed to hear it. Dr. Scott, she had said, your story shows that it's never too late to take back your power, rebuild your life, and refuse to let other people define who you should be. I'm not sure I'm qualified to give life advice, I had said. I'm just someone who finally stood up for herself. That's exactly what makes you qualified, she replied. You're not a professional speaker. You're a real woman who faced a terrible situation and came out stronger. That's what makes your message powerful. Standing on the stage, looking out at the faces of women of all ages, I felt a calm confidence. The old Annabelle would have been terrified. The new Annabelle knew she had something important to share. Good morning, I began. My name is Dr. Annabelle Scott, and exactly 1 year ago today, I was a very different person than the woman standing here now. I told them about the wedding announcement, Richard's lies, and my choice to fight back. But I also told them the deeper story, the decades of self-sacrifice that had left me weak, the slow loss of my own identity, and how I had confused love with giving up who I was. I spent 47 years believing that being a good wife meant making myself smaller, so my husband could look bigger. I said, I thought that supporting his dreams meant giving up my own. I told myself that this was love, but it was actually a form of self-destruction. The room was completely silent. I could see women nodding and understanding, some wiping away tears. When Richard announced he was leaving me, he thought he was throwing away a broken old woman who was no longer useful. What he found out instead was that he had woken up a sleeping giant. I went on to describe the legal battle, my return to academic work, and the discovery that my potential hadn't disappeared. It had simply been waiting for me to reclaim it. Today, at 74 years old, I am doing the most important work of my life. I am contributing to knowledge, preserving culture, and helping young researchers. I am financially independent, intellectually active, and happier than I have been since I was 24 years old. The standing ovation that followed lasted for nearly 5 minutes. But more importantly, the questions and conversations afterward showed how deeply my story had touched women facing their own challenges. Dr. Scott, one woman said, "How did you find the courage to start over at 73? I'm afraid I'm too old to rebuild my life at 45. You're not too old, I replied firmly. You're exactly the right age to refuse to waste any more years on a life that doesn't serve you. The response to my speech was instant and powerful. I started getting invitations to speak all over the country. Women's groups wanted me to talk about empowerment. Schools invited me to talk about how personal growth and professional development are connected. The workshops I created, called Never Too Late, Reinvention and Empowerment After 50, became a popular program. Each session combined my personal story with practical advice about money, careers, and the mental challenges of big life changes. But the most meaningful responses came from individual women who reached out to share their own stories of transformation. One woman, a 58-year-old teacher, wrote to me, "Your speech gave me the courage to leave my emotionally abusive marriage and go back to school. I start graduate school next month, and I've never been more excited." Another letter came from a 62-year-old widow. "After my husband died, I thought my life was over. Your story helped me realize that I could honor his memory while still building a new life for myself. I've started a consulting business, and I'm more financially independent than I've ever been." Each letter reminded me that my story wasn't just my own. It was a symbol for millions of women who had felt pressure to sacrifice their own dreams for others, who had struggled to keep their own identity, and who now saw the possibility of reclaiming power even after a big setback. The art show I was curating, Voices and Visions, was getting national attention. The book I wrote for the show was a huge success. "Annabelle," my professor said, "you've done more in 18 months than most scholars do in their whole careers. What is driving this amazing productivity?" "Freedom," I replied without a second thought. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm doing exactly what I want to do when I want to do it in the way that makes sense to me." "Do you miss being married?" she asked. I thought about it. I miss being part of a true partnership, but I don't miss the relationship I had with Richard. I don't miss walking on eggshells around his moods or giving up my own interests for his convenience. "Would you consider marrying again?" "I would consider a relationship with someone who made my life better, not someone who made me smaller. But I would never again give up who I am for the sake of a partnership." The conversation reminded me that one of the biggest changes in my life was my relationship with being alone. For decades, I had been afraid of it. I thought that without a husband and family, I would feel lost. Instead, I found that being alone was freedom. I could work late without thinking about anyone else's dinner. I could travel for research without asking for permission. I could make decisions based only on what I wanted. "Mom," Jessica said during one of her visits, "you seem so much more confident than you used to be. So much more yourself." "I feel like I'm finally meeting the person I was supposed to become." I replied, "The person I might have been if I hadn't spent so many years trying to be who other people wanted me to be." "Do you ever wonder what Dad is doing now?" she asked. I had heard through friends that Richard was struggling. His business had failed. Belle had left him. "I hope he's learning from his mistakes," I said honestly. "Are you angry with him anymore?" "I'm not angry." I realized as I said it, I'm disappointed that he chose to destroy something good rather than work to fix it. But anger takes too much energy, and I have better uses for my energy now. The fury I had felt in the beginning was gone. In its place was a clear understanding of what had happened and a firm decision to make sure it never happened again. 6 months after my keynote speech in Charleston, I got an invitation that was the highest point of my professional comeback. The Smithsonian Institution wanted me to help with a major art show about American folk art. They were offering me the position of consulting curator for the Southeast region. Dr. Scott, the director, said, "Your work has gotten our attention because of your deep understanding of culture and history. We need someone with your knowledge to help us show Southern traditions in a way that is accurate and meaningful." The project would give me a national platform for my research. It was the kind of career achievement I couldn't have imagined a year and a half ago. "I'm honored by the invitation," I said, "and I accept immediately." As I hung up the phone, I thought about the amazing journey that had taken me from public humiliation to professional success in less than 2 years. The woman who had been thrown away at her daughter's wedding was now someone whose knowledge was wanted by one of the most important cultural places in the country. But the professional successes, as great as they were nothing compared to the personal changes I had gone through. I had found my intellectual confidence again, my financial independence, and, most importantly, my self-respect. I had learned that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be, never too late to refuse bad treatment, never too late to take back your power. That evening, I called Jessica to share the news about the Smithsonian. "Mom, that's incredible," she said, her voice full of pride. "The Smithsonian! Can you believe how far you've come?" "Sometimes I can barely believe it myself," I admitted. "A year and a half ago, I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it's just beginning." "You've inspired so many people, including me," she said. "You've taught us that marriage should make both people better, not require one person to give up their dreams for the other's success. You've shown us what a real partnership should look like." After we hung up, I sat in my library surrounded by the books and research that showed my reclaimed identity. I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with outside praise. I had not only survived Richard's betrayal, I had used it as a tool to become someone stronger, wiser, and more truly myself than I had ever been before. As I write this today, 3 years after Richard's announcement, I am living the most fulfilling and impactful life I have ever known. At 76, I am proving every day that starting over and finding your power are possible at any age. The Smithsonian Art Show I helped curate was a huge success. The book I wrote has become a standard reference for scholars. But beyond the professional recognition, this work has given me something invaluable, the knowledge that I am preserving culture and honoring the creativity of people whose stories might otherwise be lost. I am asked to speak all over the country about empowerment and reinvention. Each time, I share my story and see the light of hope in the eyes of women who are facing their own struggles. The house is now filled with the sounds of meaningful work. My old bedroom is a peaceful place where I sleep soundly. I am Dr. Annabelle Scott, scholar, author, speaker, and finally, after 7 decades, completely myself. The woman Richard thought he was throwing away has become someone he never could have imagined. Someone who proves every day that strength, wisdom, and possibility can come from even the most devastating betrayals. My true story is far from over. At 76, I'm just getting started.